This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is a very special episode of All Access Star Trek. Not very special like that, like it used to be. But since they decided to drop the crossover episode of Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks early after premiering it at Comic-Con, we decided that we would do a special edition of the podcast that's just a review of this, dare I say, spectacular affair.
It is spectacular. Now, this is maybe a fast review. We haven't had a lot of time with the episode. They kind of sprung this on us and the world. So I don't even know what you're going to say. You don't know what I'm going to say. Usually we have some ideas before we start. So let's just get going.
All right. Well, it is episode 207. It's called Those Old Scientists. And it is the long-awaited, much-hyped crossover directed by Jonathan Frakes. And I was very nervous it was not going to live up to the hype. But it surpassed the hype in my mind. I loved it. I have not been this delighted. Like pure delight, without caveats, without, I had to think this way or do that. About a Star Trek episode like this in a long time. I just truly savored it.
The most important thing, it was very, very funny. It was very well written. You could tell, even though he's not credited, that Mike McMahon's hand was on that script. It was, because there was jokes in there that were pure Lower Decks, but it fit well within Strange New Worlds still.
Yeah, I felt like nobody on Strange New Worlds had to be out of character or adapt to being something else. And I thought that it still had a story that tied everything together and kept the threads of what's been going on Strange New Worlds in a pretty great way.
There's a kind of a surprising, touching, poignant story. It's a real Boimler episode, I guess.
It is.
And I definitely loved it. It's the funniest episode of the series.
Oh, definitely.
We've really never seen anything like this. You get a periodic episode of Deep Space Nine with someone from another show pops in, but it's not I mean, those really aren't truly crossovers. They're really just guest stars.
Right. Yeah. No, this was a full-on crossover. I mean, it started like a Lower Decks episode.
Yeah.
And then became a Strange New Worlds episode. And then at the end became a Lower Decks episode. And then became an animated Strange New Worlds episode. And even the opening sequence, they altered and did, which I have to say, worth every penny.
And now, if loyal listeners to this podcast would have known they were bookending it with animation, because Jonathan Frakes, who can't help himself, revealed that here on our podcast like a year ago. And what I'm glad, I didn't know, I was hoping that this would happen, is that because they always talked about this, about how it's Tawny Newsome and Jack Quaid are doing live action, which, we knew that's been hyped since Comic-Con last year. But we got to see all but Captain Freeman, really, the main characters from Lower Decks in their animated form. So it was like a mini Lower Decks episode. There was even a little bit of arc. Tendi and there was an emotional payoff at the end for Tendi and for Mariner and Boimler. So it wasn't just a bookend. There was a little bit of a story there too.
Well, I feel like in that opening scene, the Lower Deck stuff, they laid all the groundwork for the whole story.
Right. They laid groundwork within Lower Decks world and then set up Strange New World stuff. So a lot of work was being done in very short time. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yes. Well, it had some of that packed in feeling, like, we do a notes pass on these episodes. Like first I watch it clean and then I do a pass taking notes. And Lower Decks keeps me the busiest when you're taking notes. And you're just doing a Lower Decks episode generally. You're going so fast trying to get like references and canon stuff and what the funny jokes are. And so it was as exhausting in that way because there was so much going on in every moment.
Which, the one, which is fine, but there were slightly extra meta moments within the Strange New Worlds component, one of which was when Una, I believe, mentions how they speak so fast. Or no, was it the
I
other way
think
around?
Mariner says they speak slowly.
Right.
She complained that everybody was speaking slowly.
Oh, no, it was Una who points out that their references are very specific,
Yes.
which
Yes.
was also self-referential, because do people really talk like that? And I think that was when she was talking about going back in time and she referenced the DS9
Riots.
episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, there were a lot of, which I need to do yet another pass to catch them all, but there were a lot of Easter eggs.
Oh yeah,
You
that
know,
one's going to keep you very busy. I mean, my biggest section in my notes, which I will intersperse with everything else, but like best lines and moments is the longest list that I've made in a long time.
there's so many great lines, but it's not just a comedy. It is a comedy and it is very funny, but there's some important emotional moments for La'an, the Spock and Chapel situation.
That was very emotional.
Yeah. And, you know, Boimler himself, had the biggest arc, which the theme here is all about meeting your heroes, and they actually come out and say it a bunch of times.
And also on focusing on the present instead of the future,
Yeah.
with all of the double meanings that come with that when you're a time traveler. And I also think to some degree they were very smart, because there are moments where the things that Boimler notices or Mariner notices are the things that we, the audience, have noticed about Strange New Worlds. And so for them to react the way that we would, like Boimler's whole reaction to Spock is echoing the fan reaction to Spock, right? Which is, wait, how can Spock be so emotional and smiley? That's not the Spock I know. I know this other Spock. What is happening? And Boimler asks all those questions representing us, the viewers, in a way, although in his case, he thinks it's his fault.
Yeah, there is a lot of applying your own view onto something instead of just letting it be what it is.
Right.
Because we do that. We bring our history with us when we watch new Star Trek. And sometimes we miss, and I'm talking about we as a fandom in general. I think sometimes you can end up looking at it through a prism and just, kind of miss, like, this is what's actually happening now. Maybe we should pay attention to that a little bit more.
Right.
What this episode they didn't do, and I'm fine with this, because going into this, a lot of the questions, well, how are they going to do this, and what is the mechanism? And it was very simple. It's like, it's just a portal. It's a time travel portal, and you put in this magic stuff, and it works. And it was
Right.
called Heronium.
Yes.
So it was even that was a joke. So there wasn't anything overly convoluted, but nor did they also use the Guardian of Forever or anything more. They didn't need to do that.
No, and they didn't, which was good. I mean, they had triticale, but not quadrotriticale. But it was,
Indeed.
this special grain that had been created for this special environment.
There's so many. I mean, they even got to, like the Orion ship was from the original series, but it's from the remastered version of the original series. I mean, it is there's levels and levels, as Kramer likes to say in Seinfeld. Sorry, I use Seinfeld references that you don't really care about.
Yeah, they're lost on me because I didn't watch Seinfeld. Sorry. I've heard of it. I know who all the characters are.
I guess let's get a little more into it. How did you feel about the fact that it was very Boimler-y? Mariner only showed up halfway through the episode.
I mean, I actually, so I was disappointed at first because I love her and I wanted to see her there, but it almost would have been too much. It was the right way to do it. Like, get him in there. Everybody kind of gets to know him. And then I love, like, when I saw that they were sending him back and then I looked at the time, I was like, oh, thank goodness. I mean, I knew she was going to be on, so I was waiting, but we were only like halfway through. And you're like, okay, that's going to be great. So I think it made sense in terms of being able to contain everything that was happening.
It also, in a way, helped Boimler's story, because when she shows up, she starts acting like he was acting at the beginning.
Yep.
And he's like, shut up. This is serious. This is important, because he's already started working through how maybe it's not as fun as it looks to be in the past. Because he thought he destroyed Spock. The Spock stuff, I just, just on the surface of it, the Spock smiles and laughs were terrifying. The way they shot those, which were
Yeah.
supposed to be like
Right.
his
No, like
weird.
just a complete, like a full close up of just his big grin.
I feel like they made his teeth glow or something because
Yeah.
there was just something weird. It was so weird, and which is why, like, but everyone was, even Mabenga's like, no, this is new. This is definitely
Yeah.
not normal for him. But you can see from Boimler's point of view, it's interesting that because if Christine and Spock hooked up 2 episodes ago for the first time, but they didn't tease this Spock experimenting. I guess he started experimenting with her, and now he's expanded to jokes. That's his new thing this week.
Right.
He's not very funny though.
No, they weren't funny jokes, but he seemed to be enjoying them, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
I thought that scene in the turbo lift with Boimler and Christine Chapel was great because Boimler doesn't even realize what he's saying. He's just worried that he's triggered some terrible thing in Spock that's going to change him forever. And everything he's saying to her is devastating. Because she knows.
You can see it on her face. I mean,
she did such a great job in that scene, which, I mean, it was a pretty funny episode, so that must have been a little shift for them. But she's devastated. He's basically telling her, like, you guys don't have a future, and whatever influence you're having on him needs to end.
It's another case where it's a hilarious episode. Everyone's having a good time, but they're like, okay, but Jess, you're going to have to play this like heartbreak. She did get to have a little bit of fun in this episode, but that scene was really difficult for her, and it was but really well done.
Yeah, she did such a nice job on it. And then I also liked story-wise that she went to Spock and told him. Because again, I don't like keeping things from, it's such a lame story thing to keep stuff from people. So,
and Spock was right that from his perspective, he's like, well, I can't change what I'm doing based on what this time traveler says because that would essentially allow interference. So I'm just going to stick with my creepy smiling.
Yeah, like with my creepy smiling.
That's the surprise of the episode altogether, is that the emotional impact of it in between the just total hilarity, which was, constant.
But even in terms of character, like when you look at, so he brings up the Spock issue, which we all as viewers have been thinking about. But also even like you look at Uhura, and the Uhura we knew later liked to sing and have a good time. It's true. Like she knew how to have fun. And this Uhura, who's very young, is very serious and doesn't have fun and has to learn how to, well, first of all, there's no one better to teach her than Mariner anyway. But the fact is, like, that's character development that in a way we know is coming, and they're acknowledging it in a clever way.
They were just the worst time travelers, by the way. They were telling everybody everything. I mean, you shouldn't even pretend you know someone, let alone know you read about them and that they're famous. I mean, that's just,
and that you know their birthday because it's a holiday.
Yeah. I mean, as Uhura said, she's 22. She's like, this is a lot of pressure.
Yep.
The only one who seemed to like it, I guess, is Ortegas, famous war hero Ortegas, who drops some war veteran stuff. I always like it when we get to learn a little bit about Ortegas. So we got a little bit of flavor there for.
Yeah. I mean, there were aspects of other characters. Sometimes we learned a little bit, like we learned a little something new about Pike, which is that like I do, he enjoys a compliment. So he liked being thought of as this brave, famous guy with great hair and an awesome jawline.
Yes, it was. I mean, you knew there was going to be a hair joke, but it was done well. But I think, again, here there was an emotional side, which is he was impacted by the fact that here's this guy who knows him the future, and it makes him feel positive about his future because he knows. And it was nice that there was that moment where Boimler's talking about his future and Mariner's like, shut up. And he's like, no, I know.
And then did you see what Mariner did with her hands? She sort of outlined the shape of the chair.
Oh, really?
She's like that, and he's quit it. So it's just a very subtle thing, but I thought that was funny. How to make that funny in that moment was interesting.
Yeah, she could have said beep, but no, that's probably better and more subtle.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a funny moment. But yeah, like he did sort of, succumb a little bit to not the flattery, but just the whole idea of it. And yes, there was a deeper reason, but he also just kind of enjoyed it too.
All the kind of famous characters had their things. There was Una, and this was a fun twist where Boimler was terrified of her.
I loved every time he saw her, he was like, ah! And then he just go running away. It was so good.
So the twist there, because we don't really know what happens to her. She has no canon future. She thought, and I think they're like trying to get the audience to think, oh no, she's not going to make it.
Right.
Boimler knows that. And then it turns out that it's actually the poster. And of course, the ultimate payoff on the poster was we get to see it.
Yes. I loved so she's like, do you mean a pinup poster? And Mariner, which is such a nice touch, doesn't know what a pinup poster is. So she goes, it's like a poster that is pinned up. Are we saying the same thing? Because she doesn't know what that is, which thank you, evolution. I like that idea. So, and then she finds out what it is at the very end. And she does a little bit of her like stern thing. And then it turns out she's just really happy with it.
Yeah, she says, you've broken temporal protocols, and it's.
I have the phrase if you want it. Your flagrant disregard for temporal protocols by telling me this is deeply troubling, but thanks all the same. And then like a very soft, genuine smile.
And then she winked at Boimler.
Yeah.
That was cute. But then Ransom called her the hottest first officer.
Of course.
It's okay. He's got a waiver. He's got a waiver for being sexist because it's her husband. But so he's not objectifying her, right?
I know he is, but you can object. First of all, it's okay to objectify your partner because that's fun. Yeah. And second of all, that's the character. Like Ransom is like that.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's not such a thing that that she would know what it is.
So Lon also had a moment where she was giving them the rules, but then gave him the extra don't get attached rule, which she broke. So he can
tell she did something. And I was like, oh, she could actually now tell him what happened because it would be safe. But that was my one, if I had to have one nitpick, my nitpick would be that Boimler didn't react at all when he heard her name.
Well, you mean because it's Noonien Singh, or because my thing is they created this character, but he should treat her just like he treats Uhura. She should be just as famous, or she's dead, or maybe not. But they're either all famous for being this crew. I mean, he did say he did know who Ortegas won, so it does kind of make you think, why didn't he react to Lon like he did to everyone else?
Right. Like either because he's heard of her, but definitely the name, either way, he would have a reaction. So I thought, they could have just had him start to react and then catch himself. That would have done it. But honestly, it's such a tiny thing.
Pelia played an interesting role here. I thought they could have done something where they indicated that she's alive in the 24th century.
Oh, yeah.
And that they knew her. Like, I thought it might be funny, like, oh, hey, I know, I met you at a bar or, whatever. But she had that story where she talked about basically fake it till you make it. But
I love that speech. I thought it was great.
What I liked about that is when Boimler, when she asked if you're one of the kids, time travel kids, and he's like, one of the I'm staying here kids. But then he said, I'm a man.
Yeah.
Because he is treated like a child for most of the episode.
Well, because he acts kind of like a child. But I thought, no, and that was important because that's also the part where he's starting to take some responsibility and realize like he has to do something.
Yeah, although very misguided what he tries to do and how he tries to do it. So I'm glad he was caught. But yeah, he was throwing. I mean, he was already breaking so many temporal rules, but he decided to just keep on going at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was going to give the Orions the portal back to trade them for the grain, which would have stranded them there. So that didn't seem very smart.
I loved when they got caught by La'an, where Mariner's like, and I never get caught. And boom. It's like, that's how it's supposed to work.
Lon was very hard-ass security officer in this. She was kind of scary from their point of view.
And she's also now an expert on time travel and the rules around it.
Yes, although she can't tell anyone else.
Right.
By the way, this is just I think this is important, but one might think that this episode is set after season 3, but based on the star date that Boimler uses, this episode actually falls between episodes 5 and 6, or exactly the halfway point of season 3. So they decided this is not a bridge between seasons. This is just something that happened between episode, in the middle of last season of Lower Decks that they just never mentioned. Oh yeah, remember we time traveled last week? So,
right.
But that's fine because that show's very episodic. So, it's okay that they didn't. But I guess that gives them, maybe it just was easier for them to do that than to try to make sure that this fit with what they're doing on season 4. And because these shows are shot and recorded in such different timescales anyway.
Well, the most important thing about the star date when it happened is that it was 5 digits and a totally normal date to be living in.
Yeah. Well, there was the brief time where he was trying to act cool, like he wasn't, didn't want them to know he's a time traveler, even though it was obvious that he was. And there was the fun thing about the communicator. And they're like, I like them flipping up, so.
That was like one of my favorite lines in the whole thing. Was we said, but flipping it open's the best part. And I'm like, I know it is. Like, I held on to my flip phone for so long after everybody had switched because I just really like the flip. The Captain Kirk flip, I call it.
Yeah, which Mariner noted when she showed up and she saw him do that, and she commented on the stripes on the uniforms.
Yep. On the sleeve, yeah.
She had a lot of comments very quickly. That's when she's so rapid fire.
Yep.
I mean, every classic element of Lower Decks. You had Boimler screaming.
Oh my God. And like shrieking, running around. I loved every time he ran through the corridor. I was like, oh my God, he runs with his whole, like his limbs going everywhere. And then the scene with, the weird scene with like the gloves and the smoke and like pouring things and that whole lab stuff, which was super fun. And then when it explodes and he just starts shrieking, like, are sparks bad? Just freaking out. It was so good.
That scene was cartoony, I think. There was the moment where both of them peer around the corner.
Yep. With the goggles, with the funny goggles on.
Frakes had fun with this episode, which he should. Yeah. He did a good job. And and it was written so well. Which is, this was a tricky thing to do.
I was so nervous because it's so easy to botch. And they just did such a beautiful job. And there are a million little moments that I feel like when you rewatch it, you're just going to pick up more and more and more as you go. And I really want to watch it with a group of people.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to, we're recording this before I go to Comic-Con, but I'm going to see this episode in Hall H with zillions of people.
With a lot of enthusiastic fans.
And I think, now we're kind of, but I think it's great that Paramount's doing what they can, and they're just going to not only show it at Comic-Con, but then release it to the fans on Paramount Plus immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
Which will technically shorten the season now, because they're not going to skip it on Thursday. They're taking what would have been the next Thursday episode, and that's rolling forward now. So the season now ends a week before planned.
Right. But it's a treat for everybody that they wanted to do, and it makes sense.
Yeah, no,
if you want to do something, they wanted to do something splashy, and that's definitely splashy. And this is the episode to do it with. Like, so many little great moments, and subtle and big and emotional and funny. And I think it was so tricky, like it had a gimmick, but it was so much more than that.
Yeah, kind of like Boimler's arc, I feel like it would have gotten old for all of us if it was all those early jokes and just that, and all those references, which are fun. Without this emotional story, it wouldn't have worked. It would have just been a gag, but you can't do that for 47 minutes, I think.
No.
Even though there were jokes throughout.
No, and that would have, I think, not felt like a Strange New Worlds episode at all.
Which it had to be more than anything else, because it is technically a Strange New Worlds
Right.
episode. You know, we learned little bits about everyone. We learned stuff about Pike and his dad. I thought that was good stuff.
Yeah, that was the only part that for me felt a little bit shoehorned in. Like, let's throw in another daddy issue. I didn't, it was fine. It just, you know, it felt like, oh, we need something here. That felt like, oh, we need to fit this thing in this moment. But whatever, short, fast, done.
It did set up him accepting the surprise party at the end.
Where they drank those hurricanes, which I really want to drink because they looked fun. And then Spock's arm. It's like, my arm has never done this before. They all are looking at their hands like you do when the first time you get high.
Well, I mean, the most meta thing there was when they say everything's two-dimensional and are my eyes really big.
Yeah.
You know, it was worth it. Nothing was wasted this week.
Yeah.
I think Enterprise fans, we haven't really talked about this, but, you know, Mike McMahon has talked about how he's wanted to do Enterprise stuff on lower decks, and maybe this was it, because it played a big part of this episode. Their characters got referenced, the ship got referenced multiple times.
Yeah, like it's extra nice because even though chronologically the events of Enterprise take place before Next Gen, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, because the show didn't exist yet, they could never reference, you know, they never talked about those characters because they didn't exist yet. And so this was a way to really talk about the importance of that legacy. And I like that they picked Mayweather and Hoshi. That was nice too.
Yeah.
But they did that because the other shows couldn't. So that was a beautiful touch, I thought. And then making it because there's a piece of their Enterprise in Pike's Enterprise.
Under the floorboards of engineering.
Course, that Pelia uses. I use that floor. So
that's what I'm saying. There's just these little things. I mean, when Boimler is looking at the saddle and he gets on it and he just yells out Riker.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is like, you know, because when people try to throw rolled up paper into their garbage can and they yell Kobe. I guess it's a thing in the 24th century.
I'm not
whenever you
familiar with the throwing paper into the garbage can and yelling Kobe, but I believe you.
It's look it up. It's a thing. Maybe it's
a guy
thing.
Like I said, I believe. Well, it's a sports thing.
Okay.
And I'm not a sports gal. Just a couple of moments and lines I definitely want to mention because they really struck me. And even at the very beginning when Boimler says, disappointing Uhura would be cool. I wish I could disappoint Uhura. I was like, okay, here we go. And then when Pike says about Boimler, he said, I feel like I'm trying to stop a toddler from knocking over the furniture. And I kept thinking Mariner would have loved to have heard him say that.
A lot of the Strange New Worlds characters got good lines, but I feel like Anson Mount is really good at comedy. He's shown this before. That, you know, like that moment when Mariner asks if she can help Uhura, and he's like, I feel like I should say no, but you know, I mean, so he's just got really, you know, we saw that in the episode, the kind of rom-com episode earlier this season, you know, with Amanda and the mother-in-law. He's the funniest part of the show, ironically, even though he's the captain. That's unusual for one of these shows. But they don't do it. They don't overdo it because it's, you know, although, you know, in a way they mentioned it because Boimler mentions, a funny captain. That's unusual.
Yeah.
Because he is.
Yeah, he's a little weirded out by it. But,
yeah.
I mean, even Lan got a good line when she goes, I love grapplers. And they're talking about the grapplers. And I loved when Mariner goes, Hot Spock agrees with me. And that they've noticed how hot he is. It's fun. It's like they must have seen that, you know, Esquire magazine or whatever that he was in recently. And then all of them with their backs turned while Boimler's tearing out wires and sticking things together. Like you could just not look. And then they all just decide, okay, we're not going to look.
Yeah, Rebecca delivered that line well too.
Yeah.
Can we actually do that? So yeah, it's We could go on and on. This is a short review, but I'm not sure how much more there's to say, except, we could just keep on reading lines that we liked. Is there any
I
kind of
know.
big things that we haven't talked about?
Well, they did make a connection that fans have made, but officially was never made on the show, which is when Mariner points out that they haven't met Q yet and says they have a Trelane thing going on.
I still don't think that confirms that Trelane is a Q, but it certainly acknowledges the fan theory that he
Yes.
could be, or he's like a Q, at least. That was definitely good. Yeah, they didn't really change canon in any important ways, I don't think.
No, I mean, the only thing I was wondering was when Uhura's looking at her information and it says like Bajoran Cardassian. And I was like, were they aware of those species at that time? I mean, I know they never came up, but has there been any sort of like retrofitted history where we knew about them?
I think we've seen Cardassian on a map or something. So this show, I think, has kind of this and or Discovery has maybe gotten into that, but we've never seen a Cardassian for sure.
Right.
It could be that she's aware of their languages, but she doesn't even know what a Cardassian looks like.
Right.
It's from a book or something like that. So I think there's enough wiggle room there. It was interesting that the portal was made by ancient Nausicaans.
Right.
So I guess
Who just wrote this as a portal.
Yeah. But they made a time travel portal, which is pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that is kind of an important canon thing, because Nausicaans aren't really known for their scientific prowess. I guess there's something to be said in their history. There's this untold chapter of Nausicaan history that someone's going to have to pick up on that one, I guess.
And then they made one of Boimler's all-time favorite portals.
Yeah, not his favorite, but, on
one
the list.
One of them, yes.
So, I feel like we've said what there is to be said. Great episode. But let's just, each one of us, one more line that you loved. So why don't you give us one?
I really loved when Boimler was talking about the tricorder. And he said they never improved on them, although they got smaller and more powerful and less likely to explode.
Which I guess references the one that blew up in Arena.
Well, that was triggered by somebody else. So the way he said it, it made me think more like they just sometimes exploded.
Although we haven't seen it.
Because M'Benga seemed concerned.
Yeah, indeed. M'Benga really didn't get a lot to do in this episode, unfortunately. But Boimler was aware of him. He listed him amongst,
He never listed Chapel. He didn't seem super aware of her.
I liked when Lon and he were going over the rules, and he's like, yes, no sharing in the future. And he apologizes. It won't happen again. Worf's on her. And then he goes, dang it.
Right. Like after he says the thing about Pike's birthday, and then he goes, crap, crap, crap. Because he just keeps doing it.
He can't help himself.
And one more when Mariner said, I thrive on the grid. I require grid. I feel the same way.
Yeah, living off the grid's not going to be easy for anyone, but definitely not for her. So that's it for the special episode. We have no news. We have no bits. This is a bit of a rush job, but we wanted to get this out the day after the episode dropped. We'll be back on Friday to review episode 8.
Yeah, and we'll be drinking a lot of Orion Hurricanes in the meantime.
Goodbye.
See ya.